This is gonna take so goddamn long. It is 8:18. Realistically, will virtual reality become reality? Have you recently started seeing an abundance of meta ads? Has your cousin insisted that you need to try out Beat Saber after he got a Quest for Christmas? Do you find yourself already sickened by your daily phone use and instead would rather be fully immersed in a virtual state to completely hide from your problems and continue on with your rapidly declining mental state? Welcome to the world of VR! We hope you're here to stay, not forever in debt with a box on your face, but for when wanted, needed, and for the betterment of your life. I've decided to talk about the concept of virtual reality in everyday life. Specifically the question of, will the vast majority of the populace use some sort of virtual or augmented reality on a daily basis? For myself, VR has been a major part of my life. I've spent countless nights tucked in a pitch black room with a box strapped to my face, experiencing realities that could never truly exist in our universe. I've dreamt of headsets and hardware that don't exist, and how they could change my life in unimaginable ways. I've fantasized about the day when I could do nothing but wake up, strap a box onto my face, stay in one room for the rest of my life, knowing that anything I'd ever want or need would be through these screens centimeters away from my cornea. Do I still wish to live in a reality like this? No! Definitely not, but I do personally understand how addictive and intoxicating the virtual world can be. I've gone through it myself. First and foremost, a brief history lesson of the XR space over the last 40 years or so, as well as some statistics of how the world, or I guess in this case, let's narrow it down to the US as a sample size of the global population, has been using VR, virtual reality, and AR, augmented reality, already. Just a quick note, from here on out I will be using XR, extended reality, to generally refer to these terms interchangeably, and will specify when necessary. Additionally, I find the term metaverse repulsive, due to circumstances that will be discussed soon. Instead, I will be referring to the virtual world as the Nexus. Some additional notation before we begin, as explained by Merriam-Webster's dictionary. Virtual reality, an artificial environment which is experienced through sensory stimuli, such as sights and sounds, provided by a computer and in which one's actions partially determine what happens in the environment. Augmented reality, an enhanced version of reality created by the use of technology to overlay digital information on an image of something being viewed through a device, such as a smartphone camera. Now back to the content. The first mention of the Nexus dates back to 1935, when an American-based writer, Stanley Weiba, displayed his fictional representation for VR in his works titled Pygmalion Spectacles. The story, being a work of fiction, represents a fantasized reality wherein the protagonist meets a professor who has created a form of goggles, allowing the user to enter a movie that gives one sight and sound, taste, smell, and touch. You are in the story. You speak to the shadows and they reply. The story is all about you, and you are in it. This in itself goes to show that humans have long been dreaming of a way to escape the mundane ways of our current lives, a bit of spice and zest to pull us away from the harshness of the real world. 1960 to 61 brings us to the creation of the first head-mounted display, or HMD, as well as the first head-tracked HMD, two gigantic leaps in technological achievement led by the visionary cinematographer and inventor known as Morton Heilig. Heilig had previously created the Sensorama, a booth that could simulate 4 out of the 5 senses all at once, which were sight, smell, sound, and touch. His newest inventions, the telesphere mask and the head sight, were the first 2 true HMDs, the latter of which introduced head tracking, which greatly improves the sense of immersion, as when you move your head to look around, the world around you moves in correlation as well. However, these HMDs weren't exactly the same type you would find today. The telesphere mask contained TV screens to project 2 images at slightly different angles, mimicking the natural stereopsis our eyes use to perceive depth, which in fact does correlate quite closely to a modern HMD. It's almost uncanny how closely the two resemble each other. The head sight used a gyroscopically mounted camera to provide the image seen through the screens, a lacking the integration of CGI to provide the scene. This device was not created for the general public, but instead allowed military personnel
to survey
dangerous situations while keeping the user at a safe location. Fast forward to the year 2010, when Palmer Luckey, an 18-year-old newly found entrepreneur, patented and developed the first ever prototype for the incredibly well-known Oculus Rift. Having a 90-degree field of view, which up to this point was completely unheard of, this was also the first device to be fully powered by computer processing to develop the scene being seen. 2 years later, in 2012, Luckey promoted a Kickstarter project for the Rift, raising $2.4 million. See, this was the golden age of VR, the beginning of the first step towards the evolution of what would come today. However, this golden age didn't last long before a corporate takeover ensued, leaving the hands of the Nexus to climb to peaks it's never seen, to just as quickly tumble down those mountains. 2014 brings us to the beginning of both the age of skyrocketing and subsequently forgetting to add a parachute to the aforementioned rocket. This is the year that the corporation Facebook, headed by wannabe world overlord Mark Zuckerberg, purchased the Oculus company for $2 billion. Sadly, Luckey took the deal and the money, leaving the Nexus to the hands of the Lizard Man. Throughout the next 3 years, VR became much more widely available. 2016 came with the release of the HTC Vive, the first ever consumer-based HMD to be shipped with sensor-based tracking, allowing users to freely walk around in a tracked space. Additionally, companies like Sony, Samsung, Google, Microsoft, and many others started developing and releasing projects left and right. Samsung Gear VR and Google Cardboard utilized a smartphone to be the computing system, allowing many people without high-end computers to get their first glimpse into the Nexus and what it has to offer. 2019 is what many refer to as the birth of modern and/or mobile VR. Oculus released one of the first ever standalone devices, the Oculus Quest. This device was unlike any other that had previously come out. Utilizing a mobile processing chip, it allowed the Nexus to be fully made through the device itself. No fancy computers needed, no mounting external cameras in your room to track your movements. This device did it all in itself, allowing anyone to enter the Nexus, anywhere. Here's the kicker. The Quest released with a multi-sale retail price of only $399. Beating out any product at a cheaper price allowed Oculus to once again become the forefront to the Nexus. The following year, on October 11th, which is my birthday, led to the release of the Oculus Quest 2. A cheaper, more advanced step up from the original Quest that is currently the market leader for all of VR. The Quest 2 continues to sell into the millions this day, and it is the most well-known and owned headset of our time. Okay, damn. That was a lot more history than was originally intended, but I hope you took your notes, because I will in fact be referring to you as if you are now an expert in the field of XR. Hope you don't mind. Now then, let's get into the real meat, the reason why we're here and I'm writing all of this in the first place. Will the vast majority of the populace use some sort of virtual or augmented reality on a daily basis? To answer that question honestly, and as efficiently as I can, yes, I do. And we already do. Every day. Maybe we just don't realize it. Let's dig a little deeper. My first experience with augmented reality goes way back to the Christmas of 2011. It was a hauntingly dark morning. The sun barely shone over the dark gray clouds as snow continued to fall since the early morning. After a cup of hot chocolate, little 9-year-old me started to rip into the Christmas presents, and before my eyes, I could barely believe it. My very own Nintendo 3DS. I was awestruck, opening it immediately and thanking my mom profusely for such an expensive gift. After playing Mario for a consecutive amount of hours, I decided to delve a little deeper into the midst of the game library to find a little item called AR games. What the hell are R games? Little me pondered. I selected the item. I just opened up a new tab, give me a... I selected the item, only to be prompted to place one of the prepackaged cards from the box onto a flat surface. My confusion only grew as I hastily found a pack of cards in the bottom of the box. I placed one down and noticed through the screens on my device that the external camera in the back was now active and I could see my living room and kitchen on the screen. As soon as I brought the camera onto the card, the card seemed to open up into a world of its own. It unfolded into a sort of serene scene with water lilies and flowers and targets. I was prompted to draw a bow back and shoot the targets. I went to move my cursor with the joystick as my video game literacy instinctually engaged into. Yet, I was awestruck and I had to move the device itself to finally get the cursor to move. I was completely and utterly dismayed. How could this be happening? How could I see my own home inside of a video game, or more so, a video game brought into the real world? This was the beginning of a long road of finding ways to get immersed into a virtual world. At this age, I truly couldn't comprehend what I was experiencing, but I knew that I wanted more. As time went on, I found myself slowly fading away from the awe I had once felt. This was only revitalized every time I could share this form of what I believe to be magic to anyone who would listen to me ramble. And yes, they themselves were always appalled by what they had experienced. Flash forward a couple of years to 2016, a crazy year filled with murderous clowns, the death of beloved Bowie and Rickman, and the rise of a new video game that took the world by storm. Pokemon Go released to the iOS and Android platforms on July 16th of 2016 to the US, Australian, and New Zealand markets. It was an instant hit. The game involved using your phone's GPS tracking and external camera to follow you around as you walked through your given area in search of digitized Pokemon. Once one was found, you had the option for your device's camera to turn on and to see the world around you with the Pokemon in the same space. You were then throwing Pokeballs into the real world in an attempt to increase your ever-growing collection of cuddly little, or large, creatures. Pokemon Go truly was the first AR application to go global, having been downloaded a whopping 500 million times worldwide by the end of the year. The game had over 147 million monthly active users by May 2018, over 1 billion global downloads by early 2019, and grossed more than $6 billion in revenue by 2020. This was a truly remarkable time in the AR space, and as well as the social space as a whole. I remember fondly the day that my best friend Tabor and I downloaded the game for the first time, and left his house running down the street to see what we could find. I recall going to the park to find Poke Gyms and seeing close to hundreds of other kids and adults alike running around with childlike wonder. "There's a Charizard over here!" yelled someone, bringing the rest of us running like madmen in search for the digital orange dragon. This sprung a time of socialization like no other, where older geeks could share their wisdom of Pokemon to kids in parks and brought so many new friendships out of nowhere. This was where I, for one, knew that this technology was doing something good for the world as a whole. A time of bringing together unknown friendships and truly making the world get a little bit more physically active, whether they realized it or not. This was the first time in history that many people were actively playing, paying, and socializing through an augmented world. And honestly, I can't remember one of the better times in my memories than these simple days going out with friends to catch some new Pokemon. This was also the year that I had my first ever experience with actual virtual reality. My friend Curtis noted that his sister's boyfriend had his HTC Vive set up in his room for the week, and asked if I wanted to come and try the device. Of course I do! What the fuck? We arrived at his house, and I was prompted to select from a choice of games. There's one where you have swords and chop blocks, or there's one where you can pick up cans and shit and there's robots. I decided to pick the former first. When I placed the headset onto my head, I was fully immersed into a world of color and lights. It was overwhelming at first, but only proceeded to get more and more overwhelming as it went on. Almost immediately, blocks with arrows started flying at me with immense speed, and I did what felt most natural. I swiped in the intended direction and cut the block in half before it could hit me. I felt the vibration haptics in my controllers mimic the feeling of a lightsaber to a T, and was immediately pleased with my choice. I continued on with the rhythm game and was breaking a sweat by the time the second song had ended. After such an intense pace, I thought it would be a good idea to shift gears and try out the cans and robots instead. The game started out just as Curtis had said. I was in a hallway of what seemed to be an office building. There were some cans on the windowsill next to me, which I was prompted to interact with. Everything seemed so ethereal, unreal, almost uncanny, as I could tell this was virtual, but I was so convinced otherwise that I was standing in this office space. I proceeded onwards, finding that my form of movement was to shoot a little portal ball out of a gun in my hand. And when I squeezed my hand, I teleported to where the ball had landed. I was in shock, as I had just experienced the feeling of a superpower for the first time in my life. My 14-year-old mind was not ready to be comprehending these feelings at this point, but boy did I want more. I proceeded through the game, feeling smart when Did I start recording? Feeling smart when I was stuck behind a door, but realized I could shoot my little teleporty ball through a nearby vent. I felt alive, on fire, truly remarkable. I went into an elevator and clicked my way up. The visuals were incredibly realistic, and I could feel the sense of space, even though I had a rather large box on my head. When the elevator doors opened, a robot was standing there and decided to shoot me in my cranium as I proceeded to shit my real-world pants and fall onto the floor in a terrified panic. This, right here, this was the moment that I knew I needed to get an HMD of my own. My friend kindly let me continue playing the game. It felt like maybe an hour had passed by the time I took the headset off, for me to realize that it had been a total of 5 hours within the Nexus. I was dismayed, utterly confused at the realization that my concept of time could be so wrong while under the intoxicating influence of this technology. I went to move towards the kitchen, but instead of using my legs, as I had done for quite literally ever, I instead reached my hand out in an attempt to shoot a teleporty ball out of the room. I had forgotten how to walk. The Nexus itself, within 5 short hours, completely changed the physiology ingrained into my body and recalibrated it that quickly. This was something powerful, to say the least. It wasn't long after this experience that I got my first HMD, an Oculus Rift. Since then, back in late 2016, I have spent over 1,421 hours with a box strapped to my face. That's over 2 months of my real-world life spent in a virtually simulated experience. From re-experiencing wars and losing friends, to mining asteroids in a far-off galaxy, to mind-bending spaces that should be incomprehensible to the human mind. I have lived a hell of a lot of different life experiences through this fascinating technology, and truly, I don't know where I would be without it. Probably I would know how to play the piano and have a much deeper control of my overwhelming mental state, but back to the fun stuff. Now that we have a good amount of history about both the real-world occurrences of virtual reality as well as my own experience, let's actually dive into the meat of why we're here. Will the vast majority of the populace use a form of XR on a daily basis? Well, I truly think yes. In the very close future, over 50% of us, at least in the US, will be using XR on a daily basis, and for a lot of us, we already are. We already have been for a long time without realizing it. Didn't you say— Shut up! From the aforementioned 3DS AR applications and the well-known and beloved Pokemon Go, it's probable that you yourself have already engaged with XR in your lifetime. Let's look at some additional ways that AR specifically is used in day-to-day application. The biggest use case I can think of would most likely be the daily use of Snapchat. Snapchat, for those of you who don't know, is a well-known social app which consists of sending auto-deleting photo messages back and forth between you and your colleagues. Snapchat currently has 293 million daily active users worldwide, which, out of the total population of 8 billion, is really only 2.9875%, but man, that's still a hell of a lot of people in the grand scheme of things. Lenses is Snapchat's official terminology for what we all know as filters. These lenses are created by artists, investors, other companies, and Snapchat themselves. All of these utilize a augmented scan of your face to input some sort of digitized accessory or any sort of augmentation to reality. From dog faces to making yourself look like a baby, to companies marketing their newest headset, these lenses are one of the biggest forms of daily use AR content. With close to 250 million users engaging with its AR lenses, over 5 billion times in the last year, according to The Verge, released in November of this year. That's a lot of usage. Companies like Maui Jim, Persol, Oakley, and Costa Del Mar have been collaborating with Snapchat and Amazon Fashion in attempts to allow users to test out eyewear and other accessories without having to buy, hope, and inevitably send back the unwanted accoutrement. This in fact leads us to the next most common use of AR in the modern world. Marketing! Marketing is a huge influence for utilizing the AR space. Many companies are utilizing AR to show off products in a more natural and appealing way for the mass majority of people. Take Home Depot, for example, with their app known as the Color Project app, wherein it uses patent technology to show users what a paint color will look like in their home. The app considers lighting, objects, and shadows in the room so that you can see how the yellow shade will look in real life. This handy feature takes away the pain of buying a certain shade of yellow, only to find that it's a dampened gray mix when put onto your walls with your exact lighting conditions. Or the way that Samsung's Bixby Vision allows your phone's external camera and AI interfaces to be utilized as an enhanced virtual assistant. Its biggest accomplishment, however, is the way that it can superimpose information onto the real world, whether it be through getting enhanced information on a bottle of wine that you and your partner are considering, or even translating text right in front of your eyes on your next international journey. This technology quickly advances the way information can be portrayed to each individual in immensely helpful ways. Instead of having to step out of your reality and put yourself into a whole new one, I think it's much more applicable for certain industries where you don't want an entertaining experience. You need a useful one, states Oppenheimer and Content Stack's marketing director, Varia Makaganova, one of the leading companies aiding in reliable and intuitive content experiences for paying businesses. By utilizing AR as a means to easily and readily convey an immense amount of information in a rather simplified form, it makes understanding common issues, i.e. not knowing exactly what shade of color or dimensions of a selection of furniture, a much simpler task, aiding everyone from the corporations who don't have to pay for shipping both to and fro to a customer who's unhappy with their purchase, to the environment for not getting an excessive amount of burnt fossil fuels and transporting these goods, to the customer themselves for an easier access to information. Information. This is really the strongest use case, in my opinion, for the XR space. Information. The basis of all humanity, the thing we have transferred down through the generations in an attempt to better our kin. Information is, and will probably always remain, as the centerpiece of our society. With this attempt to portray information as easily and accessible as possible, for all to understand in the most engaging way, AR can be one of the easiest technological additions in portraying this information. Museums, for example, could even use it to display digital versions of artists next to their work. These 3D personas are then able to provide a narration instead of just a simple paragraph laid out pinily next to the art. This different level of engagement would both intensify the intimacy between artist and the viewer, while also allowing more people to access the tiny information card without feeling the urge to move out of the way to allow another contender access to the information at hand. Additionally, this could change the way that textbooks provide information to students. Take, for example, a math equation that seems just too out of reach to solve on your own. While there could be a full explanation of the problem just below it, what if instead you could scan a QR code which would step by step allow the user to get just a little bit further than before, without having the full answer just given to them at a glance. This could increase the desire for learning while still keeping the mind active and engaged. Or instead a script. Well, yes, this script could have a couple of drawings to articulate how the original designers portrayed the set, the costumes, the lighting plots. What if instead you could fully picture the stage with all of this in effect? To pull out a device and immediately set the scene for a production on the surface in front of you could make developing your own ideas such an easier goal, while making sure not to plagiarize any of the original content. I could go on and on imagining new ways that XR could be used, but once again, let's look at some more real-world examples. Medical and military use may actually be one of the biggest contenders for accessing information through the XR space. AR allows medical practitioners to actually get hands-on experience with a surgery that they've never partaken in, while making sure no real patients are in harm's way due to the lack of experience. Additionally, it can assist them, doctors, by delivering all of the essential information, like the location of body parts, and organs, vein meshes, and quick medical reports right in the front, which will assist their focus, minimizing any chances of mistakes or errors, states Technostax, one of the leading app developers for the AR space. While, on the other hand, AR can be used in an assortment of training for real-world applications for military and police forces. The biggest of which being simulators. From aerial flight simulators to battlefield simulations, VR can be a cheap and accessible way to allow just about anyone to get the proper training without being in harm's way themselves. Money and safety being the two biggest caveats. Military training is prohibitively expensive, especially airborne training. It is possible to introduce an element of danger into these scenarios as well, but without causing actual physical harm to the trainees, claims the Virtual Reality Society. All of these training applications really come down to saving money and making sure no one is unnecessarily put into danger, while still being able to portray the information and training that is needed in these high-stakes circumstances. This, while it may be the overall best use case of XR, isn't the most used as of now. The thing that truly has been growing the industry over the years is entertainment. Entertainment. This is the biggest use case for VR in my humble opinion. While yes, companies like Meta think that the nearing future will be a welcome space where everyone will solely interact through a fully immersed headset, spending all of the valuable human connection throughout their metaverse. I find it unrealistic in that sense. Sure, utilizing AR in a constant daily way will be much more feasible, especially when eventually technology gets good enough for a simple pair of glasses to fully convey all of the internet's information straight into our retinas. I do think that the temptation alone will bring most humans who can afford access to this technology to a constant state of digital interaction, but not a state of digital isolation, which I believe the constant use of daily VR would bring. Nevertheless, there are definitely days where I get home and I know the only thing I want to do is to be fully immersed in a digital world without any care for anything real. That's where entertainment and the gaming industry hold their strongest hand. By utilizing the full immersion of VR, gaming takes on a completely different landscape than it's held since its creation. This is true for both the single-player and the multiplayer market. With single-player content, nothing compares to being fully transported into the body of a character, living life through their eyes and using your own prior experiences to aid in your gameplay. This is truly one of the most immersive ways to engage with virtual content. The closest thing I can relate it to is reading a second-person book when I was younger. The pronoun of you being utilized is the first step in the immersion level, while the vivid imagination of a child is the real engine behind this experience. Anywho, flashing back into the Nexus, there is an enhanced level of sociability when you can be standing next to your virtual best friend. Feeling their presence, seeing their arm moves upwards as they go to flip you off is one of the weirdest sensations I've felt. To stand on opposite sides of my living room and play a game of table tennis with my brother, when there is no real table, no real ball, but to still feel each of the sensations that I would be feeling it's life-changing. The social aspects alone can truly bring so many people together, so many new friendships that would never be able to happen. Take VR chat, for example. VR chat is probably one of the most used social platforms accessible to date through the XR world. With a rough estimate of 19.1 million total players, and 2.3 million active players, VR chat easily takes the cake for the best social platform at this moment in time. For VR players to meet, hang out, and take a break from the mental degradation the real world can so easily bring. For myself too, VR chat was my saving grace during the recent and ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Those days where cities and towns held a strict curfew in an attempt to limit any and all contact for the safety of everyone were some of the most isolating times for me and many others like myself. VR chat allowed me to feel a sense of social presence when it was not allowed in the real world. It really was, in a way, one of the few things that got me through that painfully isolating time. But gaming is not the only way that XR could be utilized in the entertainment field. Take the recent filming of the beloved Mandalorian series and the advanced technology it utilizes to set the scene in a way unseen up until now. Traditionally, Star Wars, from the prequels onward, and many other CGI-heavy films have utilized a green or blue screen as a blank canvas to eventually mask out, allowing a digitized world to be set in its place. This was an, albeit not amazing, but a very good tactic to help in making CG worlds seem as realistic as possible. The Mandalorian, instead, utilizes a combination of a curved LED wall and the game engine software Unreal Engine to digitally create a photorealistic scene that is then projected onto the LED walls. This, while being great for the actors to actually see their surroundings and not to be surrounded by a constant sea of blue, also makes the filming aspect so much more real than could be accessed using a screen and masking effect. The colors and lighting are perfect, being fully recreated by the actual light from the LED walls. Reflections and metallic surfaces are true and don't need to be painfully digitized in post-production. Artists can create a background that moves strictly with the camera's field of view, known as frustum. So if the camera swings around and changes angles, the background shifts in precisely the same way. This allows motion-tracked cameras to execute traditional cinematography techniques that would be incredibly challenging to accomplish with just a green screen and a very long, tedious process of going frame by frame to generate the same effect. This is a revolutionary technology that, in my eyes, uses AR in a completely different way than it's been used before. While yes, this may not be the exact definition of AR, this is still, in a way, utilizing the virtual world imprinted onto the real world. This is also only the starting place of where evolving technologies can continue making the entertainment business grow in unprecedented ways that couldn't exist without it. 1 second, I have to plug my camera in, it's gonna die. Okay. Now then, this has been a very long session of ramblings and distracted thoughts, but let's put some concrete evidence on what we have now and finally put an answer to our question. According to Insider Intelligence, as of 2020, it was projected that close to 52.1 million people will utilize VR, and an additional 83.1 million will use AR at least once per month in 2020, representing 15.7% and 25% of the US population. These numbers increase the next year with a projected 58.9 million in the VR space and a projected 93.3 million to use AR at least once per month in 2021. Again, with this being 17.7 and 28.1% of the US population. These accounts will continue to climb into the present year with a projected of 89.4 million utilizing AR at least once per month, and with no free access to the projected VR use. Capitalism. However, it is projected that we will break the 100 million mark in the year of 2024 in the AR space. Just over one short year to over 1/3 of the US population being immersed into the Nexus in at least one form or another. I think that in itself is proof enough that this rapid growing technology will soon be one of the most used pieces of information, media, training, art, and overall everything. While, yes, at this state, it may not be used by the vast majority of the populace, I think it's safe to say that come the next decade, we will all be wearing some form of XR equipment. Just as quickly as the modern cell phone took over our brains, I too think that this will have a similar, but hopefully much more positive effects on both our mental state and the productivity of our society. Is this coming to a rapid closing? Yes. Yes, I do think it is, in fact.